Hello and welcome to our podcast on cinematography. We want to give you guys a short overview of what this term is and how it works in feature and documentary films, and make sure you guys are aware of this term. So let's go ahead and figure out what we're talking about. So before we get into the specifics of what makes up cinematography, let's talk about kind of the continuum or the spectrum of reality and the images of reality. Imagine some sort of spectrum kind of left to right here. On the left-hand side, we have that which is very realistic. It is just an authentic, accurate image capturing of a certain scene. And on the right-hand side of our spectrum, we have something that's a little bit more formalist, where we are a little bit more artistic in our capturing of that, where we're actually trying to capture maybe the emotion of a scene rather than its absolute historical accuracy and truth. So we see this a lot in photographs and in art. So in the upper left here, we have the photograph of a garden. This is what it would look like if you took it on a sunny day with a camera. You can see the grass, you can see the benches in the back, you can see the flowers. That's what it looks like. But in the bottom right, you can see an impressionist painting done by Monet of a similar scene. But you can see that this isn't exactly what it really accurately looks like. Monet interpreted it. This is what he felt like when he was looking at it, when he was experiencing it, when he was enjoying it. So it moves away from the realistic part of the spectrum and moves more toward the formalist end of the spectrum, where it's more about what does it feel like? How does it appear to him at that moment? Again, we can also do this with photography at both ends. Upper left, we have a very realistic view of the Chicago skyline. We can see the lake, we can see the beachfront, we can see the skyscrapers in the background. This is what it looks like, again, on a sunny day if you're sitting out on a boat on the lake. But in the bottom right, we see a more artistic view, a more formalist view of a different city's skyline. You can see that it's taken with some sort of fisheye lens, perhaps some sort of GoPro camera that creates this bubble effect, the rounded edges. I mean, this is still a city, but it is created in a more artistic way. It's more impressionistic of what this artist was feeling when he or she took this picture. So the spectrum on the left would be more realism. The spectrum to the right would be a little bit more formalist. What does it feel like? What's the impression? What's the emotion around an image? And so what is cinematography in film? These are the lighting, camera framing, camera movement choices that directors and cinematographers make in order to capture the story that they're trying to tell. In one way to think about it, it's the style of it. How does it feel as a film? Is it completely 100% realistic feeling? Or are they trying to add some sort of colored layers? Are they using angles? Are they using a lot of motion? How does the style of this film feel different from reality? We know it's a film, so it's not real. But how does it feel different? This might be the style of a film or the cinematography of it. And so here's that spectrum that we've been talking about throughout. The art of that cinematic level. It's the stuff that makes a movie. The lighting, framing, camera angles, camera motion, special effects, all of those. The artistic overlaying of those on an image to create this piece of art that is a film, that is cinematography. So who is in charge of this? Usually we have the director who's kind of in charge of everything, and then they have a director of photography or a cinematographer who is working closely with them in order to create the technical aspects of these images. Like, what does it feel like? What angle is best to capture what the director wants? What camera motion should be used? How can we make this look a certain way in order to support the story that the director is trying to tell? So, for example, if we're trying to tell a very sad story, perhaps a Schindler's List, the cinematographer would be talking about what camera angle would be best here, what type of film stock would be most appropriate, what type of lighting would be the most beneficial to tell that story there. And then they may hand off the lighting to a director of lighting. The cinematographer is going to be overall in charge of what this film looks like as a piece of art. So here are all the different ways, and this is not an exhaustive list. There's many different ways that cinematographers can create artistry through their film, but here's some of the ways that we'll talk about in this podcast of how they may manipulate reality in order to craft a different story. So let's look at these in a little bit more depth here. One would just be the lighting choices. How do we light a scene? Do we want things backlit, side, front? Do we want some sort of kind of reddish hue going on? Do we want it to look like sunset in order to create this yay Americana feel in the upper left? That manipulation of the color scheme through lighting does create some art, does create elements of cinematography. So when you're manipulating lighting, you are manipulating reality and you are adding to the cinematic palette of a film. We can also look at just the overall color palette. And so this could be done through filters. This could be done in post-production when we are manipulating film or digital imagery. This could be done through costuming. Here's some examples from the movie Traffic by Steven Soderbergh. And the way he chose to do it is that there were many stories going on all at once and kind of overlapping in this tale about how drugs have been trafficked back and forth between the US and Mexico. And so whenever he was talking about a certain storyline that dealt with the justice system, with the court system, with Michael Douglas's character, everything had a blue tint to it. When he was dealing with the Catherine Zeta-Jones storyline, everything was yellow. And when he was dealing with the Mexican deserts, everything was reddish. And so that is manipulated through perhaps costuming, but also through the film used and just kind of the post-production manipulation of the tinting could change the color palette. And that adds an artistic element. This is not completely 100% realistic in terms of how we would see a courthouse, but he is creating an impression, creating an artistic vision through manipulation of the color palette. We can certainly create different imagery through lens or camera choices. Cameras have evolved greatly since the beginnings of film. We can now see elements of handheld cameras being used. Even a lot of the GoPro type cameras that can mount onto different things give us these panoramic yet distorted views. Regardless, when we make different camera or lens choices and deviate from reality, we are adding cinematic or artistic elements to our films. Another element of cinematography is the idea of depth of field or change of focus, and kind of lump these two together. So at the top, you see some examples of depth of field choices. And so the top two, you can see that even the woman in the front and the man in the kind of middle third of the field, and then the guy all the way in the back corner of the field, all three are in focus. And so the way you manipulate that focus, the way you manipulate that set, the camera angles can create this depth of field. So we can see deep into something, and those things that are far away aren't necessarily going to have to be blurry to simulate being far away. We could manipulate that, and for some artistic reason, choose to have all of them sharply in focus. Down at the bottom, you see a scene from The Proposal, where we have Andrew's character up front, Margaret's character in the back, and at this particular moment, he's in focus, she is not. But when she does say something, the change of focus would happen where she becomes focused and he does not. And again, that's not realistic. That's not how we as humans see our world. We would either see them in focus or not. We don't really have the ability to take somebody who's 20 feet away and then instantly sharpen them up and make them into focus. That's something that only a camera can do, that only that cinematic level can offer to us. We also have the idea of camera angles. Again, this is not realistic. This is something that we're going to see from a cinematography level, something that is strictly what a movie can offer us. We don't see our dodgeball games like they do in the upper left here, from a high and Dutch angle. We would see it from the floor because that's where we would be playing. Perhaps we would see it from a slightly higher angle because we're sitting in the stands watching. But this is not how we see our world. And so when cinematographers are implying a message or some artistry to this, they're going to be able to manipulate their cameras to give us different angles through which we can see their vision. Additionally, we have the idea of camera movement. And again, the way we move in our world, a realistic view is us walking or maybe running, jumping, something like that. Whatever we see when we are moving is how our world exists. But as we move away from the realist end and more toward the formalist or the artistic end, cinematographers are able to add elements of artistry to imply emotion, to imply power situations between characters through camera movement. All three of these come from Soderbergh films. You get the one up in the upper left from Traffic. You get Ocean's 12 in the upper right, Ocean's 11 in the bottom middle. Just the way he chooses to move the camera around and show you some unique imagery that you just can't see in realistic life is the stuff that a cinematographer can control and create that imagery, that artistry in a complete film. One more thing that cinematographers would be able to do to add that element of formalism or artistry to their films is the manipulation of time. Again, for us in the realist end, as humans, time just goes forward 1 second at a time, one even minute throughout our lives. But a cinematographer can speed things up, can slow things down to emphasize or de-emphasize something. And so there's the possibility they may choose to speed up time in a fight sequence to make it seem more frantic, more ridiculous, more dangerous and scary. That's not a realistic fight. That is a more formalist fight, a more artistic view of that. On the other end, a cinematographer may choose to slow down time, to emphasize something, make something slow motion so the audience can really see and feel all the intricate details of a car flipping or a kid being pulled by his food creation machine past his dad. The cinematographer would be able to speed up or slow down time to, again, deviate from the realistic end of the spectrum and move more towards the formalist end in order to create impressions, to create emotions, to create that imagery and artistry that only film can offer. So that's about it for now. We just wanted to make sure you understood the word and the term of cinematography. It is kind of the capturing of images on film and what those look like and what those feel like and how those differ from reality. Again, what we see would be on the left-hand side, the realistic end of the spectrum, and this is just what we as humans can see. But as we move farther and farther away from that through some of the depths of cinema, we get a little bit more formalist view, and this is where the cinematographer takes over and creates emotion and creates excitement and creates artistry through this piece of film. As always, if you have any questions on that, please go ahead and bring those into class. We'll get those answered for you. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and we will see you soon.